Good morning, everyone. For some reason, I realized I get all the morning sessions in these 2 days. Yeah, as Gabriel said, thank you, Gabriel. I'm Nick from Tokyo. I work with Nikkei, the big business media company. Here, another blockchain event, and it's one of my actually goals to try have any kind of panel or discussion on a crypto conference and basically not mention regulation. It's impossible. I tried, it's not possible. If you talk about investments, if you talk about ICOs, if you talk about the future of crypto mass adoption, there's always regulation. I sat with Thai people in other panels before, Bank of Thailand and so on, but never sat in an entirely Thai panel, which makes perfect sense because we are in Thailand after all. So we're going to discuss regulation in Thailand, but not just in Thailand, what's going to happen in countries around us, what's going to happen in the future. So maybe the best if we go one by one, introduce yourself. We're going to start Thammarak, or you want to start?
Oh, okay. Yes. So I'm new to crypto. I'm from the central bank, so I'm just like learning on the crypto side. And but because we want to make sure that people are benefiting from crypto. So you have like people argue, people in the street would say, okay, crypto is money, but then that's something that we have to discuss about.
Yeah. Prinn?
I work for an investment bank called CITIC Securities. So CITIC, as you may know, CITIC is a Chinese firm, Chinese conglomerate. CLSA, Credit Lyonnais, is a French bank. I'm on the board of the governors of the Stock Exchange of Thailand and on the board of National Innovation Agency and Electronic Trading Development Agency, so the two agencies that are involved a lot with innovations and e-commerce in Thailand. But the interest comes also from the fact that CLSA, my firm, has a financial technology fintech arms that invests in projects, invest in a blockchain platform and blockchain enterprise.
Thank you. Bhume?
I'm mostly an academic, or former. I left a teaching job a while back, and I started advising several companies on cybersecurity and later on blockchain. Lately, I do two things. I advise government on cybersecurity as National Cybersecurity Commission, and I also advise SEC on all things technology. Lately, it's 80% of the time I spend there is on blockchain-related regulation and innovation. So the recent draft of the law, all the rules and regulation that's taking place right now. Yeah, that's what I do.
From someone who doesn't live in Thailand, I can tell you that in the last few months, I've noticed the number of articles mentioning Thailand and obviously crypto, this and that projects and business ecosystem and so on has increased, right? Maybe we can start with a very general point of discussion. How would you, from your different perspectives, someone who advises the SEC, the Bank of Thailand, and also from like a stock exchange perspective, how would you judge the overall situation of cryptocurrency regulation, but also generally ecosystem in Thailand at the moment? Who wants to start?
Okay. So it's a long story, but it started around 13, 14 months ago where serious debate started happening whether we need regulation. SEC has been looking at this problem for 2 years and realized that the existing legal infrastructure isn't there for SEC to extend its arm into digital asset and cryptocurrency space. Bank of Thailand was doing the same thing, trying to figure out how to appropriately extend interpretation of its law into this space, but it wasn't as easy. So Ministry of Finance formed together a team to figure out, so that involves Bank of Thailand, SEC, Ministry of Finance, and Anti-Money Laundering Office in Thailand. And at the end of it all, after about 5 months of deliberation, the government realized that this is an emergency because at that point was basically the period of peak interest in ICO around the world, and there were a lot of scam that's happening in Thailand. And the government basically says we need to come up with the law quickly. So they spent literally a couple of weeks drafting the law together after 5 months of deliberation. So it wasn't exactly like out of thin air, but the period to draft the law is very short. And then we passed the law, and it came into effect last May. And it's one of the first law that's specific and comprehensive in the world, as in it covers everything from issuing of token to fundraising of token, what type of token are there, who can transact with them, who needs to be regulated and licensed, all in the power of SEC. The law initially started off very broad, but it gives SEC power to narrow it down to related scope. And that's what we've been doing for the past 6 months, which is to appropriately shape this power to enable innovation and still protect investors. So when that happened, basically Thailand is put in blockchain map immediately as being a country that very quickly respond, and SEC understand this space fairly well. If you talk to most player in Thailand, they would realize that SEC knows about digital innovation, blockchain, digital asset in some area more than industry do, and in some area just as well as industry does. So it's very interesting.
Just out of curiosity, the original impulse was, I mean, that's the primary job of the SEC, I would assume, is to protect the consumers, right? That was the original.
Yes, the original reason was to prevent scam and fraud. I think that's the same in all countries.
Exactly.
Because a few people that want to innovate, nobody really mind. But once it becomes broad and people are scammed out of a couple million US dollars, and that's a lot of money in Thailand, the government becomes
It takes
restless,
action.
and needs to take action.
Thammarak, Bank of Thailand, we heard how it started from the ministry, and you kind of all got together, and obviously you covered different aspects of it. But also, how, from your perspective, how did this all start, and where, at what point are you now from the BOT perspective?
Yeah, so at the start, when we were told about Bitcoin, we were thinking, okay, so what it is, people were saying that it's money, and of course, from the central bank point of view, it's probably not money because it's not backed by a sovereign. But then it's a good medium of exchange, and there have been use cases where people use them for good things, for financial inclusion and things. So when we come back and we ask ourselves, what does a central bank have to do with cryptocurrency? Apparently, we said probably not much at all, because we don't see it as money. But then, in a way, if people use it for payment, people have the right to use it for payment. But we want to also ensure that if they use it as payment, then it would not affect the consumers in ways that are like in the wrong way. Yep. So when we come back and we talk to SEC people, they said, okay, should we regulate crypto space? We said, okay, at least it's not money. So probably we don't want really to do anything with it. But then if it comes under our regulation, for example, payment, because if people issue e-money, electronic money, they would need to have enough, I mean, we regulate them regard to the float. The float will have to stay with the banks. We regard them with regard to KYC and AML, CFT. So those are the aspects that we want to really look about, and also on FX regulations. So these are our concerns, and then we talk to SEC, and the SEC say, okay, they have concerns on other things like investor protection, consumer protection. So probably we should work together. So at the end, we come and we talk together, and we look at different aspects and say, okay, if it's an issue of ICO, it's a security or utility, then it's like issuance of securities, more or less. I mean, the process more or less the same. So probably the SEC can do the primary market regulation. And secondary market regulation exchanges, then there should be people who look at how these exchanges operate. So probably the SEC can do that quite as well too. So for us, for the banks, currently the banks probably do not know much about crypto space. They are learning as well. So at the end, we say at the Bank of Thailand, probably the banks shouldn't be involved directly at this moment, but their subsidiaries can get involved. Because now that there's a general law, there's this emergency decree that actually covers everything, so subsidiaries probably can get involved. So at this moment, if the banks actually want to do it, they probably can come and talk to us. And we try to be very open and cooperative, so they probably can propose their projects and come to the sandbox. And we have to look at all these criteria to be consistent with.
So there is no, at this point, there is no banks coming to you on this.
The banks are not allowed to do. Yep.
Interesting.
But if they want to do something that is related to blockchain and cryptos, they can come talk to us. So in Thailand, at this moment, we have this regulatory sandbox where...
Anyone working for a bank here? No?
Probably not.
Like, talk to the Bank of Thailand,
yeah, you can talk to the banks, explore. The banks want to work with startups and fintechs. So there's currently, I think, blockchain community initiative. They try to put like letter of guarantee on blockchain among the banks. But of course, the banks are new to the technology, so probably they need to get some feedback or collaboration from the industry.
Well, stock exchanges. Have you been involved in this conversation? Like, for example,
actually, just to amplify what Dr. Bhume was saying as well, the original interest and concern from the Thai authorities come from the Ministry of Defense and the security angle.
Oh, that's
because, as you're probably aware, the speculative angles of cryptocurrency has been more appealing, and the ones where I think more than 500,000 plus people in Thailand, mainly the younger group of people, start punting, tradings, and whatnot. You know, Thais love to gamble as much as the Chinese or any countries in the world. So the original concerns was about a year and a half ago, where I got called into the office. Actually, Kun Gao Tipsuda, the Deputy Secretary General of the SEC, and another senior member from the Bank of Thailand. So we were all called into a meeting at Rap Nung, which is the military compound of working office of Deputy Prime Minister Prawit Wongsuwan. And when you get called by Kun Prawit Wongsuwan, the general, who is effectively the kind of a number one security man in Thailand, you thought something was ongoing. And so the first question he asked, obviously Kun Prawit is a career military guy. He has no idea about the technology nor the speculative angle, but he knows that there was a lot more foreign interest in this business, because originally Thai started trading crypto many years back, but there was no authorities, no security alerts. Suddenly, over the last 1 or 2 years, there's more Chinese firms and a few more foreigners who come to Thailand and started doing digital monies and issuing coins in the underground markets. And that's when the number one security man, the Deputy Prime Minister, called us all in and asked whether it should be shut down. And on that night, I think it was the opening of another crypto exchange. I'm not sure how that crypto exchange has gone now, but they were opening a crypto exchange reception at the Shangri-La Hotel by the river. And that event was attended by almost 4,000 people, mainly students. And the military presence in that event around was quite obvious, and they were going to shut down and arrest some of the people. So they were asking how they should be arrested, what charges, and so on and so forth. We were trying to talk them out of it, not to arrest. And in the end, the arrest didn't go ahead. And luckily, we persuaded Dr. Somkit, who is a deputy prime minister on the finance side, to understand the whole thing. And once Somkit, who is a deputy prime minister looking after the finance side of things, understands it, because he said, look, my son does it. So his son worked for True Corporation. And his son is developing a platform where in the future you're going to get the peer-to-peer lending platform like you saw in Thailand, where we got JFinCoin, the JMart platform. So once the Bank of Thailand gives the license in the future, this True Corporation, the son of the Deputy Prime Minister, is working on a alternative credit scoring system, and they're going to use the blockchain, the data, all the stuff to match. So he gets it. He said, look, my son does it. So he explained another meeting was arranged, and then So in the end, it was okay, but that was kind of spark of the interest. And then he said there's an urgency to regulate this coming from that meeting.
There's a national security event.
It became a bit of a, they were worried that it was not just Thailand only speculating. It was clearly that China was banning ICO And this also impacts our business because CLSA CITIC is a Chinese firm. So originally we were going to go outright to launch an ICO fund, to set up a fund that can invest in ICO projects, but we had to pull back.
This Chinese exchanges that were kind of blocked in China coming into Thailand is using
Exactly.
the
So a
playground.
lot of the Chinese, the Koreans, and yeah.
That's very interesting when you get like a 4,000 people event and military involved. It's like pretty hardcore.
But on the stock exchange of Thailand, we are beginning to think of using it because the reason is everywhere in the world, you're probably aware of this, there's an issue called naked short selling. A naked short selling is when you sell a stock without ever owning that stock in the first place. I think there's a company called Overlook or Overstock in the US, Patrick Byrne or Brian Byrne, Patrick Byrne, who does this as a blockchain technology. So the Stock Exchange of Thailand hired a couple of blockchain developers, mainly from the Singapore and from the region, to develop a program where in the future, hopefully, we will be able to identify through the blockchain exactly to locate at what time the stocks is being owned by who, to verify that ownership. Because at the moment, as you know, we all talk about algorithm trading, the DMA, direct market access. All this technology, high-frequency trading has come about, and we accept it, we embrace it. But when it comes to regulating people who use those programs, it's so difficult because you can't prove and say, hey, you own these stocks at this milliseconds when you're selling the stocks. So it's a big issue, and we're now using this blockchain technology in process of developing to help. That's on the back office side, and also about the stock ownership, where to store, the custodian, and the settlement that will go with it. On the front office side, we're thinking about to do a tokenization of the whole 600 plus securities on the exchange. So if any of you have expertise, I'm not sure any of you work with Gibraltar Exchange when they try to do it but fail, and a couple of exchanges in the world trying to do this. So the Stock Exchange of Thailand is actually shortlisting or in the process of potentially opening a tender for bidding to see who can be the advisor on this tokenization process of the securities. There are 620-something stocks listed on the exchange, and they're looking to move onto this tokenized process.
Interesting. We're going to come back to the point where how different parts of actually regulators use blockchain internally. But back to the regulatory part, Bhume, maybe like ICOs, STOs, where are we now? What is the situation? You've been discussing about that obviously as part of the regulatory initiative. I believe in the last year was one of the most hot topics to discuss when it comes to regulation. I know other countries, Korea and Japan, are looking really into how to regulate that. And we had a panel yesterday about the death of an ICO. Question is if it has to be regulated in the end next year. What is your take on it?
Okay, so to SEC, ICO is just another way of doing fundraising, and that's an activity that needs some regulation. Right? The question is how much, right? Because you can't just let people fundraise to the public without any kind of rules, because that's ground for fraud of all types, right? So SEC has recognized that from day one, over 2 years ago, and SEC, first of all, I speak not for SEC, I'm advisor, so I help them, but I don't speak for them, but I can tell you of the experience. We've been looking at the law, and it just turns out that the securities law that we have at the time, it's still the same one, doesn't allow SEC to touch crypto at all, because the definition of securities is very rigid, and it all involves something tangible, and crypto is not tangible. So we had to come up with a scheme. So we started drawing up what advantage blockchain provide and what blockchain doesn't solve. And then we realized that those are the things that needs to be regulated. For example, sales and marketing solicitation of tokens needs to be regulated. You can't say things like buy my token and there's 20% return per month. That's not allowed, right? Promise of guaranteed return is not allowed, and things like that. People who do ICO needs to declare who they are. You know, you can't just do anonymous ICO, things like that. So we identify all sorts of trends, and then come up with the rule. So to cut the story short, the end result is ICO is legal in Thailand. There is a structured way of doing it. In Thailand, what we do is SEC realized that it involves understanding not just business but also technology, and SEC is not going to be advising on the technology side. So what we do is we created a new kind of business called ICO portal, which serve the fundraising mechanism and the advisory side. So if you're an issuer, someone who wants to fundraise, you have to go to one of these ICO portal that we call them to get them to help you do fundraise.
It's like a desk, SEC desk that helps, that works with.
It's not part of SEC. This
Okay.
is like a license. So people can form together. A group of experts says we know how to fundraise.
They have to be
using
licensed by the
ICO,
SEC, though.
and then they come to SEC. SEC gives them permission. So it's not really a license. It's a registration.
Okay.
But to get yourself registered, you need to prove to SEC that you know what you're doing. And SEC will not consider any ICO request that does not get endorsement from one of these ICO portal. So it's basically a requirement that you have to get a third party to look at you, right? In your process, does it comply with the law, and things like that? Because we recognize that many people, there could be many issuers. Each issuer probably do ICO once every other year at best. So we can't expect everyone to understand the rules and regulation. That's why we created this class of business, which is basically they're the FA of the ICO world, who are an expert on rules, regulation, and technology to help you structure methods of fundraising, how to do your smart contract or your token properly, how to follow all the rules and regulation. So there's a structured way to do it, and it's a fairly new model when we created it. But then once we created it, we realized that a few countries that were thinking along the same line. So it's been revalidated a few times in a few countries, and many other countries are looking at this model of semi-self-regulatory entities where private sector are discussing among themselves how to best perform fundraising. Because in the past, IPO is a very rigid structure of how to fundraise, right? ICO could be much more fluid and flexible, and so we created entities that are supposed to be expert. And if something goes wrong in the future, SEC will just deregister them to stop the damage.
How many roughly those ICO portals are?
Right now, there's undergoing registration right now, so I can't tell you how many people are going to get approved. But
there's no limit.
There's no limit.
Whoever satisfies
but
the
at least
conditions,
10 express interest. At least a few has filed all the paperwork so far, and they're slowly coming. So I suggest that you look at January, that there will start to be issued of registration and license in January. That would be my guess. So ICO is possible of all sorts. There's just one limitation. Your token cannot be securities. So when we talk STO,
that was my next question.
Right. So your token cannot be securities because the Digital Asset Law in it exempt Securities Act.
Yeah.
So if it's a securities, you have to go via the method of Securities Act, not the Digital Asset Act. So you have to structure your token in such a way that it's not exactly securities. Like it can't be equity exactly. It could behave like it in some sense, but it needs to be missing some property of equity. Because if it has all the property of equity, it will become equity. Then you have to use Securities Act. So if you want to do ICO, you have to go with the Digital Asset Law.
Do you call it utility?
We call it investment token, actually. We don't call it securities. So for example, if you do revenue sharing, profit sharing, but no voting power, you're fine, right? Things like that, right? So you can give back interest, but you have to be careful about promising to pay back, because otherwise that would be debt, right? And things like that. So long as you can structure in some way that it's not one of the 9 things that are considered securities in the security law, you can do it under digital asset law, and there's method to do that now. The question at hand now is securities token, asset-backed token, and debt token are the hot topic around the world, and those fall within the purview of securities law. It's regulated by the same entity, but there are still questions on whether or not existing securities issuance process fits with the framework of the industry. So I think 2019 will be the year SEC goes back and look at that space. So STO in Thailand has always been possible. It's just that the method is a little bit antique.
Because
antique as in
different types of securities.
you can do it, but you need to be an established business already, because you can't issue securities if you don't have a couple of years of profit history in Thailand. So STO, short answer is it's possible, but it's not for startup right now. But SEC is likely going to review that this year.
The securities and debt are regulated by old regulation, but ICOs have investment tokens have a new one now at the moment. But, interesting. A little bit back to the Bank of Thailand, Thammarak. Like you said, originally your role in the overall, let's call it crypto economy or crypto world, is slightly different. But I was recently talking to the Bank of England, for example, and they have this created the fintech hub, I believe they call it, where they work directly with blockchain startups, and they also look at different ways of interacting with crypto and blockchain. What is your experience? I know you have a couple of projects in the Bank of Thailand right now, with outside partners mostly, right?
Yeah, so when we heard about blockchain stuff, we were wondering, okay, what could be the benefits of it? So I think the management just said, okay, if you want to know about blockchain, then probably we just need to do some projects. So we look at all possible use cases that might be relevant to us. So at the end, we came up with 2 projects. So one would be the scriptless bond sale, where currently retail investor, if they want to purchase saving bonds from the government, they would go to one of the 4 major banks, which are the agents, and the central bank is the registrar of the bonds. And currently it takes about T+15 to actually get the allocation, because the banks would need to check whether the purchasers are eligible or not. And the database are like at various places. And we have to reconcile all these records, send it back to the banks, and the bank would send it to the branches. So if we use blockchain, probably it would take about T+1 at most. So that's one project that we are doing, and I think probably would help serve the interests of the people. That's one project that is actually it's going on into production. I think in 1 or 2 years. Another project is to learn about digital currency, because we have read a lot about this digital currency projects being conducted elsewhere. And we want to see whether it would help improve, blockchain could help improve the payment system. So currently we are working with a few banks in Thailand and starting doing POC.
Thai banks? Or?
Thai banks and some of international banks also. Okay. Yeah. So it's just a test, though. I mean, it's in wholesale, so it's the interbank payment, and I think quite a few other central banks also are doing this kind of projects. If you went to Singapore FinTech Festival, I think it was a big news about digital currency, where the IMF MD was talking about central bank digital currency. I think these are the areas that most central banks are at least very aware of and are learning. And we also do some cooperation with the industries. So as other central banks, we also have a regulatory sandbox where banks can partner with fintech firms and try to test projects where they serve the customers. And currently, we try to make it even more convenient for the industry. So probably the banks do not need to come to the BOT at all, to the central bank at all, to actually do this kind of POC or test their products to the customers, if these projects comply to minimum standards. And only projects that would come to our regulatory sandbox would be those that involve infrastructure. So blockchain is one of the kind of projects that probably would be classified as infrastructure if you do it among a number of players. So these are what we're doing.
Interesting. And then, Prinn, like one question for you, and this is probably the regulatory aspect that it's talked least about in all these regulatory discussions about crypto, the tax position. How do you see this in Thailand, and just generally overall with taxation?
You know, when you start, we're talking about regulation or even tax, I have to tell you that you have to be mindful that different countries you go to, you will see different aspects of cultures, of traditions, that you probably have to respect different countries. And in Thailand, even the position from the Bank of Thailand or SEC, in Thailand, we've been through a big Asian financial crisis. We were the epicenter in 1997. So the mindset somehow, when you think about regulating new technology like this, they're coming from a mindset that they want to maintain stability, sometimes perhaps status quo, or making sure the stability of the system, financial system, and the commercial banks. So I do sympathize with some of the regulators here, whether on the stock market side or whether on the commercial banks or the money side. Having said that, there's now that the roles that the rule of law needs to be played in order to advance and develop the industry, especially one as finance, where many of us here knows that the startups or the SMEs are the ones who are lacking cheap and fair financing. They couldn't get access to capital. It's not just Thailand only problems, but this is a problem that regulators thinking more and more that they need to play a role in this to bridge the inequality gap and the role to develop. So bring me to my next point, where the inequality issue is even more apparent and evident in Thailand. So tax or fiscal policy is one of the tools where I hope going forward, and this is also up to us, up to conference like this, up to some of us who are the leaders in the thinkers in the blockchain field, in the cryptocurrency field, to be voicing out there for the government to walk the talk. Because this government talks about leaving no one behind, talk about sustainable development, talking about helping the smaller guys. But when it comes to taxation or even regulations, there's still a lot of hierarchical, a lot of labyrinths to scatter through. You heard Dr. Bhume talks about ICO portal. Some people in the room, I'm sure, probably disagree that there should be an ICO portal at all. What's the point of having it when you want to open it up? It's a quality issue, perhaps you want to screen it and, and so on and so forth. I understand that angle as well. But on the taxation side, it has to be fair and it has to be able to collect in a meaningful manner. At the moment, unfortunately, the Ministry of Finance has not given an exemption yet on any form of ICO or the trading, the investing in Thailand, meaning that if you trade cryptocurrency in Thailand, you have to pay and file for your own income tax. It could be a minimum starting from 15%. It could be more if you have your incomes and so on and so forth. So you have to work, and if you have big portfolio and trades in Thailand, just be mindful that they do and will be able to come to the exchange that you trade on and get your information on that side. So you still have to file that on income. Compare that to the stock exchange of Thailand. If you trade stocks on the SET, you pay 0 tax.
Okay.
No capital gain tax. You pay dividend tax, that's 10%. You pay dividend. If the company pays you dividend, you pay dividend tax. But capital gain tax, no sales tax yet. But they're charging you tax on cryptocurrency already. So it's a surprise where SET is already quite a big animal, big monopoly, so to speak. And the people who invest on the SET are relatively, obviously, are wealthier people by average than investing or punting or trading cryptos. So that's one side. The other side that's even more worrying is on the ICO, initial coin offering, where if you want to issue ICO in Thailand, most people who do ICO, as you're aware, are startups or people who have white paper ideas that they want to bring to life. And some of those ideas are not even bring to life yet, but they have great ideas and great teams who wants to do it. Now, if you want to help startups or help the younger people or help the smaller guys to have any chance of competing against the big conglomerates in Thailand, you want to be having a tax environment where it should be conducive for those businesses to grow and raise capital. But unfortunately, there is a 27% tax. 27% is 7% VAT, so value-added tax, boom, on one go. And 20% is corporate tax in Thailand. They haven't waived this yet. They are in a process of thinking about what structure and some ICO, what category may be exempt or what can they do. But at the moment, like JFinCoin, JMart, which is a company I mentioned, they're raising the money for their digital lending platform. And they got taxed straight away. They raised 660 million baht, boom, 7% VAT. And then if they book that as a profit or as a money raise, they would get 20% on top of it. And this compared to some of the larger firms in Thailand, you're all aware that the digital economy can be unequal in many places. The digital divide is real. 3 of the largest companies in the digital space in the new economy in Thailand, Line, Google, Facebook, guess how much tax they pay?
I say less.
Exactly, very close to zero. Google pay like less than $1 million baht. So if you talk about fairness, sales tax, those guys pay zero tax. Even worse, they don't pay VAT. So if this forum, Beyond Blocks, organized in Thailand, you want to advertise on Bangkok Post or Nation, the newspapers, you pay VAT. Sabres to pay 7% VAT. But you advertise on Google, Line, and Facebook, no VAT, 0%. How can that be fair on a competition ground? So it's...
How hard is it? Yes, how hard is it to figure out for the people that invest in cryptocurrency and trade and ICOs to figure that taxation policy? Is it easy for them to understand this 20 cent? Because I know in a lot of other countries, people, like in Japan, for example, people that invest in cryptocurrencies and they struggle to figure out like how to pay taxes on it, even if they want to or agree with them.
So I'm not saying to be controversial, and this is my own personal opinion, not any of the companies I work with or board I sit on, but you have to understand that in Thailand, the tax usually is a tool or an indication from a government whether they're supporting this industry or not. So on the one hand, having a digital asset law may appear to try to legalize things and say, look, we want a good quality stuff, we don't want a fraud, and so on and so forth. But on the other hand, the people who are holding powers, they're not trusting, they're still scared, they're still worried. So that's why the environment of tax come out this way. Otherwise, they would have issued exemption straight away. There would have to be incentive for you guys to do more ICO in Thailand. And as a result, we've lost some good ICO to Singapore and to Switzerland and probably in the future to various other countries. But there are some of those companies who are pressuring the revenue department already and engaging them constructively to talk to them, look, you have to probably flexible on this tax.
It's also, back to Bhume, and it's a very fast-moving environment, right? And some countries that went to regulate fast and now they're kind of falling behind. They have all these different approaches with, of course, China and then Korea blocking everything. I mean, blocking not Korea didn't really block ICOs or trading, but there was all these indications that the government is strongly against it, right? So people panicked, and Japan was a bit different. Countries in the region in Southeast Asia are getting a bit more active now. Singapore is here, is always the fast mover in the space, I think, that attracts a lot of business. How do you see the overall, let's just focus, for example, on Southeast Asia here. How do you see Thailand within this ecosystem and the overall ecosystem in Southeast Asia on the regulatory and business friendliness, let's call it, for blockchain and crypto projects?
Okay. Let me help answer quickly about the tax side, because there might be a few people in the audience who are wondering. The immediate answer is if you are paying income tax in Thailand, before revenue generated or income generated from sales of crypto token are considered income, so you pay full tax. But now with the new law, you pay only capital gain tax on it. So in Thailand, if you do invest in crypto, just keep track of your expense and income, and then show it when you pay your tax. And now it's a capital gain tax, so you just pay full tax on the profit made, whereas before you pay full tax on the revenue made, right? So it makes much more sense now. What's difficult right now is for company to do ICO. The default stance of revenue department is that they will charge VAT and income tax, but that's the default stance. SEC and our revenue department are in negotiation because ICO, some of them are not goods sold. So you're not supposed to pay VAT on them, or you're not supposed to treat them as income because there could be capital or debt. The revenue department is considering that, so they're considering creating classification. So pending announcement of revenue department, Companies that want to do ICO may want to wait, but they have to wait anyway because the full regulation on releasing ICO is not out anyway. It'll be ready in January or so. Hopefully by then, Revenue Department will be ready too. So that's the short practical answer, which is that if you want to do ICO in Thailand right now, default is you pay both. But in the future, maybe not, because this is, like you said, it's a very fast-moving area. Bringing that broader, several countries in this region are also looking at our regulatory scheme. SEC are around the world are always in discussion and meeting, and hopefully soon there will be international table where lots of securities regulator are coming together to try to create a uniform regulatory space. That's one idea that I've been pushing at SEC in Thailand, as well as when I visited US last week, to say that maybe we can somehow create a regulatory framework that is consistent, at least in ASEAN, plus a few countries that are trading allies. We can create a more congruent market, similar to what we have in capital market, where if you issue securities in US, you can sell it in Thailand because there's trust between regulation, because we've ironed out the difference in our regulation. We're hoping to progress on the same thing within the next couple of years. Yeah, and Thailand will be a major player in that.
Same basically question for Thammarak from the central bank perspective. I assume you do talk with other counterparties, especially in the region. How is that conversation going? Is there difference of opinions between your colleagues in other countries?
Yeah, this depends on whether the central banks has the mandate on securities or not. So like the Bank of Thailand, we focus only on the monetary side, and we regulate banks, but we don't regulate security firms, for example. But other central banks, some of them do. But for like the majority of central banks, when we look at cryptocurrencies, we just see it as not being money, of course. But some certain central banks, a lot of central banks, we regulate payments. So I think cryptocurrencies would fall into payments, and there are certain central banks where they see the benefits of crypto. For example, I mean, I can say the Philippines, for example, they regulate exchanges and money changer in terms of using crypto for remittances. So there are central banks that, if it falls under the payment jurisdiction, then either they promote it or they want to regulate it. Yeah. But otherwise, in general terms, central bank is often quiet about it because we don't see it as money, and we cannot really classify it as such, because some of them might be securities, some of them might be utilities, some of them might be like payment tokens where people want to use for themselves. But if it's payment, then the central bank probably want to take a look at if it involves like AML, CFT, and consumer protection.
Awesome. I think there's a lot of aspects that we have to cover. We're already out of time, but maybe someone has. Did anyone do an ICO in Thailand here? No.
Can I just touch briefly, because I just got back from Vietnam, but I tell you the feeling, comparison, Philippines and Thailand, we are together as definitely a relatively friendlier nation to the cryptocurrency landscape when you talk to regulators. I think we're definitely friendlier than Indonesia and Vietnam. You know, even though there is a lot of traders in Vietnam, make no mistake about it, there's a lot of good punters there on that side. That's why the authorities are concerned. So I think that the regulators in Vietnam, when they come out with regulations, I'm not sure whether they've already spoken. I hope they have to the SEC or the Bank of Thailand. When they come out, I suspect it'll be a tougher one, because the tone I get from being in Vietnam the last 2 or 3 days, it was an economics style conference, but meeting the central bankers and the Ministry of Finance people, it looks like it's not going to be more relaxed than what Thailand and Philippines has come up with. So even though we do complain, or we do whine and grind about how the Thai regulators may be tough or maybe have a lot of rule of law, in the future you're going to see that happen. In Singapore, even though they're taking an interesting way, where I like, is that they just let you guys do whatever you want first, almost like a policy sandbox in a way, let innovation run in a fast lane, and they find smart way to equip you guys with education or with mindset in order to do it. And then the other regulation will come in later on. You know, central bank there is actually not so much pro-crypto. I mean, most central bankers, no one is pro-crypto per se, because they doubt the benefit of crypto. They like the blockchain, the technology, but
as we heard from
that's what, that's what.
But
with crypto, I mean, it can be beneficial, but if it's beneficial, it's probably, I mean, but it falls under other jurisdiction. So for us, we just...
They're going to kick us out. I saw someone has a question in the audience. Can you just come to the mic probably and then ask, and also introduce yourself?
Hi,
please.
my name is Amp. I have a question. So we've heard a lot of talk about ICO regulation, but I have two questions. So the first one is, how would you classify stablecoins? And what's your stance or view on stablecoin regulation? Thank you.
Is it Thammarak or you? Who's going to do the stablecoins?
I'll start and I'll send it off to him. It's fairly clear that in Thailand, stablecoin to SEC is right now, temporarily, we don't consider anything stable unless it's backed with currency. And if it's backed with currency, SEC has implicitly decided that it's really Bank of Thailand purview because there's the e-money regulation. And based on our understanding, Bank of Thailand is completely open to the idea of someone creating stablecoin if they can guarantee float reserve and follow the e-money regulation. So I'm handing it off to Khun Thammarak because SEC refused to handle that question.
Okay, let's say,
on the spot.
Stablecoin is something that is quite new. But for us, when we look at it, we probably have to talk to those who want to issue stablecoins, as Dr. Phume has mentioned. But at this moment, when we look at it as, although the back-end technology is different from the current e-money, at the end, to the consumers, they are the same. So the regulation should be along the similar line where you need to guarantee that the floats are there in secure manner. It's called accounted banks, and the security of the system is up to the standards. And KYC and AML should be up to the standard as well. So these are the three aspects. But since it's so new, probably you have to come to talk to us and educate us as well as exactly what business model you have and what kind of technology you're using.
You see how friendly the regulators are in Thailand. Come and educate us. Come and teach them.
But that's a very good stance. That's a very proactive stance. Like, it's much better than being like, oh, you know, like, we know everything and we don't want to interact with people. So.
If you know everything, then it's easier, but we don't know.
We're running out of time. We have one more question, and then, or maybe two, if someone doesn't kick us off, and then we're going to have to wrap it up. Please introduce yourself.
Thank you. My name is Khalid Janov. I represent BigX Digital Asset Exchange from Switzerland. I have a question. Are there any self-regulation associations in Thailand representing crypto exchanges or other market players? I'm just interested, how do you interact, and do you have, what sort of interaction do you have? How do you cooperate? Do you have any ideas, useful ideas coming from these associations?
I think, it's what you talked about.
Interacting with who? SRO interacting with...
Between the national regulator and associations.
A self-regulatory association, basically, as you...
No, the SRO, I mean, Stock Exchange of Thailand is supposed to be SRO, although we do get regulated by the SEC. Is our Security Exchange Commission regulates the security industry, including the stock exchange, but the Stock Exchange of Thailand is probably one of the few that can claim to be SRO organization. We have law, we have some powers to hand down punishment and fines, and there is an association of brokers called ASCO, Association of Securities Company Organization, that originally wants to found a crypto exchange themselves, but because of the cost, the technology, the scalability, everything, they're now leaving it to the SET. Because interestingly, in this country, I'm not sure you guys are aware, unlike many countries, the stock exchange here has not yet gone through the demutualization process. So we are membership-owned, members-owned. That's why it's called the Board of Governors, and there are 11 governors on the board. And the memberships, there are about 41, 42 memberships who own the exchange. the governments or the Ministry of Finance, they gave the power for us, almost like a public power, for government power, but they don't own us, and they have no stakes in that. The interaction from the securities organized ASCO interact regularly with the Stock Exchange of Thailand, and the Association of Broker interact very regularly with the SEC, the regulator. There are hearings, there are kind of dialogues, policy dialogue. In fact, I think tomorrow, there is a policy dialogue session that the SEC is organizing, and then you are welcome to come. It's a big regulatory thing. It's in Thai though, but I'm sure you get translation.
This is an exclusive announcement at Beyond Blocks. Everyone come to it, please.
So that response was for the traditional capital market. For the digital exchange, that's entirely different. SRO, typically the way it operates is that there is regulator, but regulator either by law require that regulator somehow recognize some SRO, or regulator themselves chooses to recognize SRO. Digital asset law does not recognize any ASRO in the law, but SEC is under consideration that something that we want to have happen, SEC may not want to do it themselves. For example, there may be requirement on creating a price index to handle a certain things like asset reserve and capital charge and net capital requirement and things like that. That SEC is reluctant to be the one who create these things, and we're waiting to see if the industry of exchange will form together into an association of digital asset exchange and come to discuss with SEC if they want to handle that. And SEC may say, okay, it's really SEC power, but we'll write it off saying we'll regulate you in some way if you agree to do this thing with certain confidence level, things like that. So there are rooms for SRO to happen in digital asset space, and SEC is considering some, but there's no industry body right now to come in and serve SEC on that requirement.
Japan is considering self-regulatory body now for the exchanges in crypto, and I think it's a double-edged sword. It's one of those things where you have a buffer zone and a fast-moving body in between, but then if bad thing happens, it still comes down to the government.
So there are lots of negotiation that has to happen. If you're doing SRO, SEC has to make sure that you're not for profit with some hidden agenda in mind. But to cut the answer short, it's really the room is open, but no one is coming to SEC right now. But SEC is open to that idea.
So last question, and then we really have to go. Make it brief, please.
My name is Kane. We're developing some sport science product, and we're trying to involve blockchain here in Thailand. But what I'm curious about is I know a lot of private industry is gaining interest in using blockchains as a database and development, and ICO is, people are more realizing it more of it's not for trading anymore. It's actually useful to fundraise and go into blocks development. But as you were saying about income tax and VAT structures in Thailand, I'm just curious about if companies in the private sector is expanding into the ICOs, how is there a guide on how to do company registration? Do you need to register a sub company that states that you are going to be fundraising through ICOs? Because I know JMart is probably registered as a trading company, right? So any income from them will be taxed under their trades, what they're registered for. So with the ICO hub, right? How do you find updates, and then what is the regulation?
How do you register a company, and how do you do all the stuff around it for ICO?
So if you
This is the Ministry of Commerce issue, which is the registration. The Ministry of Commerce are thinking and talking, but even the scriptless or the digital registration of the shares, or how you hold your shares and whatnot, they're still going through that process. So actually, that's a space where advisory or outsource the advisory is needed to how to do that, because that's where the future is heading, but it's in the terrain of the Ministry of Commerce of Thailand on the company registration.
So a bit more friendly towards early businesses.
So registering company in Thailand is easy, but it involves paperwork and it involves a little bit of cost, but it's not that hard. You can do it in a week, a day if you are very well prepared. For ICO regulation, there is no requirement. You just have to be registered as a company. It could be existing company profiting. It could be an existing company failing. It could be brand new company. SEC will look at each ICO issuance on a deal per deal basis. So if you're a failing company and you want to do ICO, SEC may require that you declare that to your investors, people who come in to buy. It's this very much disclosure based.
We've seen quite a few of those globally.
So in the past, without regulation, there are lots of failing companies that didn't disclose that they're actually going bankrupt and they're doing fundraising, which is really funny. But in Thailand, SEC will require that if there's something interesting in your history, you may have to declare it. Based on your question, practically anyone could register a company and do ICO in Thailand because the law doesn't require that the company be owned by a Thai. It just has to be registered in Thailand. So it could be a foreign company decided that they want to establish in Thailand, but you do have to register. You cannot bring in foreign business and do an ICO in Thailand. You have to register an issue based on entity in Thailand.
Do you have to have employed Thai partners?
There's no such requirement. Okay. Yeah.
I think that's pretty much it. Thammarak, Prinn, and Bhume, thank you very much for this. We can talk for hours probably about regulation. If you want to know more, probably you can catch these guys outside quickly. Thank you very much. Thank you.